Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you 3 steps to achieving the perfect instrument blend. Achieving that perfect instrument blend and that perfect instrument balance in your mix can be difficult, especially the more instruments you have. But there's a couple key components and key concepts that if you hit on, really help to make sure all your instruments complement each other, they sit together well, and they aren't competing for the same space. Step number 1 here is you want to write or record complementary parts. What I mean there is when you're writing out these parts or when you're tracking these instruments, you want to make sure each part is sitting in a different frequency range or playing a different rhythm. That way, no instrument is fighting for the same space in the mix, either rhythm-wise or frequency-wise. Let me give you an example of this. Let me mute out the drums and the bass here in this mix. I'll also pull out our vocals. That way we're just focusing in on our instruments. Before we get into this, let me play you the instruments all together. Then we'll mute them all out and we'll add them back in piece by piece. And we'll talk about this concept of recording and writing complementary parts. So here's just our instruments in the mix. We've got a lot of instruments going here, but notice you can distinguish all of the instruments because we have complementary parts here. So let's break this down. Let me mute out all our instruments here. And we'll pull them in piece by piece as we laid them in. We started off here with just this piano loop. The next thing we added in here is the main rhythm guitars. Now notice when I add in the main rhythm guitars, they're sitting a little bit above the piano loop in terms of frequency spot, okay? Our piano loop's a little bit lower. It's holding down that kind of 200 hertz area. Our rhythm guitars are going to sit a little bit above that, so pay attention to that when I add these in. So our piano loop is holding down the low mids. Our rhythm guitars are holding down the mid range. These two different frequency ranges make sure these two instruments don't fight and one doesn't sit over the other. Next part we're adding in is our delay guitars. Now these are going to sit in the same frequency range as our rhythm guitars, but with an alternative rhythm, they're going to sit and fill a different space than the rhythm guitar. So pay attention to the different rhythm here we're going to have on these delay guitars. Those being a picked part help to distinguish them from the rhythm guitars, even though they're sitting in the same frequency range. Next piece we're adding in here is our acoustic guitar part. Now these are going to fill a completely different frequency space than our electric guitars because they're going to have the pretty high end that you have that comes from miking an acoustic guitar and hearing those strings hitting the microphone. Okay, so pay attention to the different frequency spot that this acoustic guitar fills. It's going to sit a little bit higher than our rhythm and delayed guitars. the acoustic guitars, excuse me, really fill their own space. And if you notice, when I kick those in, it feels like they fill this spot that was empty before. Without the acoustic guitars in there, you can kind of get used to the delay guitars, the rhythm guitar, and the piano loop, but when I kick that acoustic guitar in, they fill that spot that really seems like something was missing there. They don't take anything over, they don't distract from anything else, they just fill an empty spot. And that's what we're going for here, excuse me. Next piece we're gonna add in is our piano part. So listen to what this piano part does. I'll solo it up for you, and then we'll talk about what it's adding and what it's filling space-wise. So our piano is sitting in two frequency ranges. It's taking up the low mid area, and it's also occupying the mid range. So that's competing with our piano loop as well as our rhythm guitars. But the way we get rid of that competition is by having it play a different part. So our rhythm guitars are a strumming pattern. Our piano loop is the same couple notes over and over. It's a constant part. This piano part here is a melody of its own. That way it's not fighting for the same space as the rhythm guitar. It's not fighting for that strumming area, and it's not fighting for the loop pattern that this piano loop is occupying. By having it play a different part than the rhythm guitar, it fills a different spot and a different space in the mix. The next thing we have to add here is our organ. So what our organ is going to do is fill all of the holes left by these instruments. So all of the instruments coming before are, actual played instruments. Well, the organ is an actual played instrument too. But what I mean by that is this is a smooth instrument that is constant all the way through. The piano loop has some gaps in it. There's going to be some gaps in the strumming, in the picked part, in the acoustic part, and in the piano melody. This organ part is going to serve to glue those together by being one constant note all the way through. Let me start without it, and then I'll put it in and I'll solo it up. You can hear what it's doing. So notice this is even sitting higher than our acoustic guitar, which gives it a different frequency space as well as a different rhythm than all of our other instruments previously to distinguish it from all of these other parts. The last piece we're adding in are these vibes, which are going to sit way up on top. They're going to be a little bit pokey here, which is going to help distinguish them from the other parts, but all again, these are all complementing each other. They're all going to work together to serve the track, to serve the song. I'll start without these, and then we'll kick them in. Even though these vibes are pretty quiet on the mix, you can still hear them, you can still distinguish them from all the other instruments we have going because they're sitting in a different frequency range written to complement these other instruments. That's step one, is writing parts that complement each other and that fit together rather than overlapping. Step number 2 to achieving the perfect instrument blend is balance. We're going to go through one more time. I'm going to mute all of these. We're going to go a little bit quicker this time though. And what we're going to do this time is bring them up in volume. So we'll start with our piano loop and we'll ease in our rhythm guitar. You'll hear a spot when you're pulling your instruments up that they fit together. One isn't out front, one isn't buried underneath. You can still hear both parts and they work together to serve the track. So that's what we'll do with each of these instruments. We'll pull them down and then ease them back into the track. Starting with just our piano loop here. So that's step 2. Go through instrument by instrument. Start with your bass instrument and bring up each piece after that, and you'll find the right point for each instrument. If it helps, go a little bit past it, a little bit below it, and then ease into that middle spot, and you'll find the part, you'll find the balance that suits the previous instrument. And you'll go through, add your next instrument, pull it up, find where it suits the previous 2 instruments, and so forth and so on. Some instruments will have to be a little louder. You noticed the piano loop versus the rhythm guitars. The rhythm guitars are obviously sitting a little bit louder than the piano loop because they are the main rhythm guitars, rather than just being a droned piano loop that's supposed to sit a little bit more in the background. Now our final step here, step 3 to achieving that perfect instrument balance, is EQ. You can use your EQ to carve out certain frequency spaces to sit other instruments in. We're going to go through this briefly and look at a couple of these. We'll start with our 2 electric guitars. So here's our rhythm guitars, here's our delayed guitars. You can see on our delayed guitars we're cutting off a little bit more of that low end because we don't need that from the picked part. And we're emphasizing a little bit more of that 5K area to get the picking part to come through a little bit more. Whereas on our rhythm guitar part, we don't have a pick part that we need to exaggerate with our high end. We have a rhythm part, so just a little bit of high end, and we're leaving a little bit more of that low end area in. But we are cutting everything below about 150, 138, 140 or so to leave room for things like our piano or our piano loop. Those kinds of things, okay? Moving forward, let's take a look at our acoustic guitar part. So you remember on our guitar parts, our electric guitar parts, we cut a little bit of that top end area. On these, we're leaving that shine in because we want to hear that pretty shine, that pretty sheen coming from our acoustic guitar strings. It's that kind of magic that you want from a mic'd acoustic guitar, and it helps to sit it in a different spot than our electric guitars. Moving on down, let's take a look at our piano here. We're boosting quite a bit of this 5.5, 6K area, and we're cutting that low end area because we don't want it to fight with things that are sitting a little bit lower. Again, these make room for the bass as well by cutting below 150 or 140 on our guitars, and our pianos helps to make room in the mix for our bass and our kick and the low end elements. But we're pulling up quite a bit of that 6K area to help this melody line cut through a little bit more, so it's not getting drowned out by our picking part or our acoustic guitar part. Onward and upward, we have our organ part. Here, we're just emphasizing the mid-range. You can see we're pulling our high pass up to about 240, and we're cutting everything above 7K. We just want this to round out the mid-range. In step 3 here, you're using your EQ to find the fundamental energy of each instrument and using that to contribute to the mix. So you can isolate a little bit of that fundamental part of your instrument and then pull it up, and it will contribute its piece, its part, its voice to the mix. Onwards, we got our vibes here. Doing the same kind of thing we were doing on our organ, right? We're isolating just the important part of this instrument. If I were to solo up our vibes here, there's nothing below 500 that we need on this vibes part. So we can pull our high pass up to 500. We can isolate everything below about 10K. And that's our fundamental, that's our important part, that's our energy on this instrument that we're going to pull up and add to this instrument blend. And then our final piece here, which is our first instrument that we are adding, is our piano loop. And you can see, again, we're just isolating that mid-range because it's a piano loop drone. That's all we want to get from this. We don't want too much of the low end on there. Otherwise, it's going to fight in that 200 hertz area with our rhythm guitars and our delay guitars, right? So just find the essence of each instrument and what it needs to serve the blend. Let's look one more time. And what I'll do is I'll pull off all of the plugins on our instruments and I'll kick them back in, and you can hear what it does to our balance and our instrument blend here. We'll start with out and then I'll kick them in. You can hear when I pull those EQs off, everything gets a lot more dull and the instruments aren't serving their purpose. They're not contributing their energy and their voice to the mix. Just to review, step 1 is to write and record complementary parts to get that perfect instrument blend. Step 2 is finding the right balance and the right level for each instrument as you pull it up in the mix so nothing is overshadowing any other part. And step 3, our final step here, is using EQ to carve out frequencies and emphasize just the energy, just the essence of each instrument. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Now, before you go, I do want to give you something for sticking with me today. This is my 7-step mixing checklist. You can download it for free using the link below in the description. This resource will guide you through the mixing process step by step so you can get professional, radio-ready mixes without the guesswork and without the hassle. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.